Last time out, we were talking about forgiveness, and it reminded me of this theory that I've been working on for a while. Every so often I just think about this and I kind of mull it over, and I thought now might be a good time to present it on the Fuel Project. Now, usually by the time I present an idea on the Fuel Project, I'm feeling pretty confident about what I'm saying because I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I've been trying to consider all the various angles and arguments, so I'm feeling quite secure in what I'm talking about. But this one's a bit different. It's not fully formed, it's still a bit vague, and because of that, this video is likely to be a bit more unfocused than usual, a bit more here, there, and everywhere, and less definite than usual. So what I'm basically doing here in this video is I'm saying, look, I've got this vague idea, it could be true, but not necessarily. What do you think about it? Let's kick it around a bit, let's have a discussion, let's see where we end up. That's kind of where I'm at with this one. So anyway, without further ado, I'll get right into it. This is the theory. Have you ever played a game of Monopoly where one of the players gets themselves into a losing situation? You know how in Monopoly you get into a losing situation where it's literally impossible for you to turn it around now. You're gonna lose. You get into this kind of tailspin where the board is stacked with other people's houses and hotels. They own all the good property. You're hemorrhaging cash with every roll of the dice. Going to jail feels like a sanctuary because at least you don't have to roll the dice and land on other people's squares while you're in there. But this is the thing about Monopoly, it's often a very slow demise. It doesn't come quickly. You can see that you're gonna lose and that there's no way out. But between that realization and actually going bankrupt, there's this brutal period where you're losing all your money, you're having to hand it over to everyone else. And this gives a chance for the winning player to rub their hands in glee and gloat and be smug. Well, anyway, have you ever played a game like that where that's happening to someone? And they're getting so annoyed about losing and they're so bitter and so furious that eventually they just flip the board and storm off. The pieces scatter everywhere, the game's ruined because nobody can remember who had houses on what squares, and they just storm off in a huff. Now, when someone does that, what they're basically saying is, if I can't win this game, then nobody's allowed to win this game. If this game is ruined for me, I'm gonna ruin it for everyone else as well. I'm not gonna graciously sit here and take the L and sit in silence and watch you play and have fun and be happy. I can't be miserable in a world where all you guys get to have fun and be happy on this game. So they mess up the board. I'll call this the Monopoly effect, or the Monopoly tantrum, perhaps. Now, I'll call it the Monopoly effect. So, I had this email a while back from Michael who asked me to do a video on the Nashville school shooting which happened in March 2023. And what I find remarkable about school shootings in general is how often the Monopoly effect seems to be in play. The typical school shooting is carried out by someone who once went to the school in question, but within that environment they were, in a manner of speaking, a loser. Perhaps they had no friends, they were bullied, they had no fun, they didn't get good grades, they were failing, they were just always in trouble with the teachers, and it caused them a great deal of misery. They feel like their childhood was horrible in that place and was perhaps even stolen from them in that place. And so what they're basically saying is, well, if I didn't get to have a good childhood there, nobody else is allowed to have a good one there, if one at all. If I'm a loser, then everyone else has got to be a loser. I can't sit here graciously and take the L and let everyone else play and have fun in that place. I can't sit here miserable in a world where everyone else is having a good time and playing and laughing and having fun and being happy. That's something like what's happening in school shootings in general, you find. It's the Monopoly effect. It's metaphorically flipping the board to make sure that nobody can win. What was ruined for me, I will now ruin for everyone else. There's a scene at the end of The Count of Monte Cristo where the villain, Count Mondego, Fernand Mondego, has lost to the hero Edmond Dantes. Dantes has won, he's got his wife and family back, he's now a very wealthy man. Mondego, on the other hand, is left with absolutely nothing. However, Edmond Dantes graciously gives Mondego the opportunity to ride off and be free and to build a brand new life from scratch. He gives him that opportunity to go off and live this new life. However, as the evil Mondego considers riding off into freedom, he decides he just can't do it. Instead, he turns back to kill Dantes and he says this is his motivation.
Now I couldn't live in a world where you have everything and I have nothing.
If Mondego can't have the wife, family, friends, and wealth, he can't live in a world where Dantes gets to have any of those things either. In the place where he feels he is a loser, he has to try to make sure that everyone else loses in that same place as well. Remember in the last episode, I said that unforgiveness leads to retaliation, which spreads evil in the world, but it also spreads bitterness and evil in your own heart. Well, that I think is partly what's going on with school shootings. It's this bitter root that says, in the same place that I feel broken, I now feel entitled to then break everyone else in that same place. So evil is amplified out there, but it's also amplified in here as well. Now, let me expand this idea. Let me now extrapolate it into different areas and different settings and see if this continues to hold true and if it continues to make sense. I wonder if we're also seeing the monopoly effect in the youth's desire for communism today. It's been well documented that the youth of today are alarmingly in favor of communism. And I wonder if what's happening here is many kids are looking at the capitalist system, and the capitalist system creates winners and losers because it's driven by competition. So competition always generates winners and losers. And I wonder if many kids who feel like losers within the system are basically saying, I can't live in a world where I have less and others get to have more. And there's a bitterness and there's a jealousy that leads them to say, well, if I'm not going to win at this game, then nobody should get to win at this game. So let's flip the board. Let's tear down the whole capitalist system. Let's tear the whole thing apart. Winston Churchill once said, the inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessings. The inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries. So are these people basically saying, I can't cope with some people being more blessed than me, therefore everyone's got to be as miserable as me. Everyone's got to share in my miseries. I often feel that what is driving people's contempt for capitalism is envy and jealousy of people who have simply done well for themselves and who have more within that system. So in the area where people feel like they're losers, in this case financially, they want to make sure that everyone else are losers as well by just demolishing the whole system, by flipping the board in the air, by tearing down the whole capitalist infrastructure. Now let me expand it again and get perhaps even more controversial when I say, I wonder if we're seeing the monopoly effect in drag queen story times as well. A lot of people are quite rightly asking the question, why is it that drag queens seem so fixated on gaining access to children and seem so determined to perform sexualized acts in front of children? And I think the same thing could be said of gay pride events as well. And I wonder if the answer is these people had their innocence stolen as children, so their instinct is now to say, well, if I didn't get my childhood innocence, then nobody should get their childhood innocence. Maybe it's not as conscious as that in this case. Maybe it's more of a subconscious mechanism, or maybe it is conscious. But either way, in the same place that they have been broken, they now have this instinct to want to try to break others. And so the evil is expanding out there, but it's also expanding in here. You know, something I raised on this channel years ago and have revisited occasionally over the years is this idea that homosexuality is caused by childhood traumas, by emotional and psychological scarring in developmental years. I did this experiment where I randomly picked 10 gay celebrities, then I looked into their past to see if I could find an obvious place of trauma, something that would explain the brokenness in their sexuality. And it turned out that Elton John's father had abandoned him as a child and he craved the missing male love. Ellen DeGeneres was abused by her stepfather, Rosie O'Donnell by her father, Ricky Martin was sexually abused as a boy, George Takei was touched by an older boy at camp, etc. They all fitted the trauma theory except for one. Only one of these 10 didn't fit that trauma theory. What I haven't spoken about yet in relation to this is how often these people then went on to have sexual allegations leveled against them. I'll use the word allegedly because these cases were often inconclusive and innocent until proven guilty, but have you ever heard the phrase that hurt people or that broken people break people? Well, it's something like that. But more specifically, it's that broken people seem to want to break people in the same place that they were broken. So people who are broken in their sexuality will then often go on to break others in their sexuality. People who are broken in their innocence will try to break others in their innocence. People who are broken in their school will want to break others in their school. People who are broken in their finances want to see everyone broken in their finances. Remember, Michael Jackson had his childhood stolen by an abusive father, so later in life he developed this fixation on young boys who were still in their childhoods. I'm choosing my words carefully here, but I hope you can see what I'm trying to get at here, and how much of the evils we see in the world are perhaps because of unresolved trauma that then leads to bitterness and unforgiveness and resentment. The monopoly effect says, since this is what happened to me, this is what should then happen to everyone. I want to normalize this. So I guess what I'm really talking about when I talk about the monopoly effect is really just unresolved envy, bitterness, jealousy, selfishness, and unforgiveness. I'm talking about unresolved sin. Does that make sense? Am I onto something here? I think these are just some examples of the evil that can spread in the world and the evil that can spread in one's own heart when we live by the sinful nature with unresolved unforgiveness and unresolved bitterness and envy. I might return back to this concept another time once I've thought about this a bit more, but in the meantime, if you've got anything you want to add to this, if you've got any thoughts, I look forward to reading your ideas on this one as well, because as I said, it's still a work in progress. I just thought now would be a good time to talk about it since our last video was on forgiveness and this one kind of links nicely onto it. So that's why I'm talking about it now. But there it is, the monopoly effect.